I first realized something was terribly wrong the moment my father refused to look me in the eye. It was the night I came home clutching the acceptance letter I had dreamed about since I was 14. The letter that said I would be starting at the University of Wisconsin's medical program in the fall. Instead of celebrating, he and my mother sat stiffly on the couch as if waiting for a verdict, not a miracle. I remember staring at them, thinking maybe they were numb with pride. Maybe they were overwhelmed. Then Dad cleared his throat, and the sound felt like a blade sliding across ice. "Arya," he said, "we need to talk about the college fund." My stomach tightened. He didn't speak like a man delivering news. He spoke like one confessing to a crime. When he finally said the words, I emptied the account. I felt the room tilt as if gravity had shifted without warning. $180,000. My entire future. Gone overnight. And then he added the part that gutted me most. Your brother needed help. Ethan's debts. They became dangerous. Mom reached for my hand as if that would soften the blow. Family comes first, sweetheart. She said it with the tone of someone expecting applause. But all I could think was how easily they had sacrificed my life for my brother's mistakes. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just felt something inside me fold shut like a heavy door no one would ever open again. For hours after their confession, I moved through the house like a ghost. Every corner felt unfamiliar. Every wall whispered a betrayal I hadn't noticed until now. My acceptance letter lay on my bedspread like a cruel joke. I kept touching it, tracing the embossed seal as if my fingers could anchor me to the version of my life that still made sense. But the truth kept crashing back. I had nothing. No savings, no tuition, no way forward. It wasn't shock anymore, it was survival mode. I forced myself to count backward through the years of extra shifts the summer I worked 2 jobs, the holidays I skipped because double pay meant one step closer to my dream. I'd done everything right. I'd saved every penny like Grandma always told me. And somehow in one night my parents proved that even the most disciplined life could be cracked open by someone else's carelessness. I didn't speak to either of them that evening. Not when Dad pretended to fix the porch light to avoid my eyes. Not when Mom knocked softly on my door whispering, "You'll understand one day." Understand what? That love meant erasing me. That responsibility meant rewarding the child who had never earned anything and punishing the one who had. Around midnight, I finally stepped outside for air, the Wisconsin spring still cold enough to sting my cheeks. The neighborhood was quiet, soft windows lit by families who probably had their own problems tucked neatly inside. I wondered how many of them would ever imagine something like this happening. A father forging a daughter's future into a lifeline for a son who'd gambled away his own. When I walked back inside, Ethan was at the kitchen counter chewing cereal like it was any other night. He didn't even look embarrassed, just lifted his spoon and said, "Rough night." The casual tone made my pulse spike. I stared at him, wondering whether he understood the magnitude of what he'd destroyed. When he shrugged and said, "I'll pay it back someday," something inside me hardened completely. He couldn't pay back his own rent. How was he going to return $180,000? I didn't reply. I just walked away because the alternative was screaming. Later, when the house finally felt still, I opened my laptop and stared at my bank login screen. A part of me prayed there had been a mistake, that maybe Dad had exaggerated or misunderstood. My fingers trembled as I typed. When the balance appeared, everything inside me went quiet. $17. It didn't matter how deep I breathed. It didn't matter how tightly I squeezed the edge of my desk. The truth wrapped around my ribs and pressed until I could hardly inhale. I had been emptied out, stripped bare without warning, and without mercy. But even in that hollow moment, a spark flickered, anger sharp and bright. And anger in my life had a habit of turning into momentum. So I closed my laptop, wiped my face with the sleeve of my sweatshirt, and made a decision. Tomorrow, I would go to the bank. I would get answers. Real answers, not the vague half-truths my parents were hiding behind. I didn't know what I expected to find there. I only knew one thing with absolute clarity. This wasn't the end of my future. It was the beginning of a fight I never asked for, but was suddenly ready to win. The bank smelled like polished wood and quiet judgment the same way it had since I was a kid depositing birthday checks from my grandmother. But that morning everything felt sharper, colder, as if the walls themselves were waiting to hear the truth before deciding whose side they were on. I walked through the glass doors, gripping my folder of documents, the last proof that my future ever existed. Grace Holloway, the branch manager, spotted me instantly. She had been working there since I was in middle school, a woman with calm gray eyes and a voice that always sounded like it belonged to someone who had seen worse storms than mine. But when she saw my face, she went still. "Aria." "Are you all right?" she asked, stepping out from behind the counter. "I need to close my account," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "And I need a printed transaction history. Every withdrawal. Every transfer." Something flickered across her expression, not surprise, not confusion. Worry. "Come into my office," she said quietly. Inside, the blinds filtered sunlight into thin lines across her desk. I sat down and she pulled up my account with the care of someone opening a fragile relic. When the screen loaded, she inhaled sharply, almost imperceptibly. But I noticed. "How long have you known?" I asked. Grace folded her hands, choosing her words. "Your father came in several times over the past month. He presented documentation, signatures, authorizations." "My signatures," I said. "Yes. I didn't sign anything." Grace held my gaze for a long moment. "I didn't think you did." The room tightened around us. I felt the nausea of betrayal crawl up my throat, but I forced myself to stay still. Stay calm. Stay sharp. "Why didn't you call me?" My voice broke despite my effort. "I wanted to," she said softly, "but the transactions followed protocol on paper. And your father insisted you were aware. He said you were helping Ethan get back on his feet." The words stabbed. "Do you really think I'd do that?" "No," she said immediately. "That's why I want you to see something." She turned her screen slightly toward me and scrolled through the withdrawal list. The first few transfers were small, 5,000 here, 8,000 there. Typical amounts for someone who was either cautious or deceptive. But then they grew 15,000, then 30,000, until the final one, $120,000 in a single day. My pulse hammered. That one wasn't even broken up to avoid flagging. Why didn't that trigger a manual review? "It did," Grace said. "And that's the part I can't explain. I escalated it, but the approval came back almost immediately." "From who?" She hesitated. "A senior auditor. Someone I don't normally work with." Name. Grace lowered her voice. "Aaron Calder." The name hit me with a strange mix of familiarity and dread. Calder. I'd heard it before, linked to quiet scandals, whispered rumors about financial irregularities, the kind of stories adults traded in hushed tones when they thought kids weren't listening. "What does he have to do with my account?" I asked. "That's what worries me," Grace said. "He's not supposed to oversee personal withdrawals. His department handles larger matters." "What kind of larger matters?" Grace looked at the closed door, then back at me. "Internal investigations, corporate liability, and accounts flagged for unusual patterns." "Why would my account be flagged?" "You didn't flag it," she said carefully. "Your father did." My breath left me in a cold rush. Dad had volunteered my account for scrutiny. Why? Because he knew what he was doing was wrong, because he wanted help covering it up, or because someone else was involved. I leaned back, pressing a hand to my forehead. "Grace, is there anything else I need to see?" She swallowed hard. "There is. And I need you to understand that showing you this could cost me my job." I straightened. "Please." She opened a secured file folder on her screen. Inside was a list of flagged accounts, mine included. But next to my name was a tag I'd never seen, HLX07F. "What is that?" I asked. She shook her head. "I don't know exactly." Those designations show up when accounts are under external review. Usually federal. Federal. The word froze the air. Grace, I whispered. What are you saying? I'm saying, she replied softly. Your father did not just drain your account. Someone else was watching the money move, and whoever flagged it used a code I haven't seen in my entire career. I felt my skin prickle. And one more thing, she added. Your father wasn't alone when he made the last withdrawal. My heart dropped. Who was with him? She clicked to open a grainy security image. My father stood at the teller window, shoulders tense. Beside him was a man I didn't recognize. Tall, dark coat posture, stiff and controlled. But what chilled me were the eyes. Cold, calculated, watching my father like a handler observing a subordinate. Do you know him? Grace asked. No, I said, my throat dry. But he knows us. Grace nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. I think so too. I stared at the man, a pulse of fear tightening in my chest. That wasn't a friend. That wasn't someone Ethan owed money to. This was something else, bigger, older, sharper than gambling debt. Arya Grace said you need to be careful. Whatever is happening, it's not just about your brother. I felt the truth settle like weight in my bones. My parents hadn't only taken my college fund. They had walked us into something dangerous, something organized, something watching. I closed the folder and stood on unsteady legs. This was no longer a family mistake. This was a storm, and I had just stepped into the center of it. I drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers throbbed. Grace's words replayed over and over. An unknown man, a federal-style account tag, my father volunteering my fund for external review. Nothing fit the story my parents had fed me. Nothing even resembled it. By the time I pulled into our driveway, every light in the house seemed to glare with accusation. Inside the kitchen smelled like burnt coffee and stress. My mother sat at the table, elbows tight against her body as if she were bracing against a strong wind. Dad hovered by the sink, pretending to rinse a mug he'd already washed. They both looked up when I entered. We should talk, Dad said. We will? I replied after you tell me who the man was. They exchanged a look that confirmed everything, fear, guilt, and something darker. What man, Mom asked too quickly. The man standing beside you during the last withdrawal, I said, pulling out the printed still image Grace had given me. I slapped it onto the table. This one. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Dad's shoulders stiffened. Where did you get this? He asked, voice brittle. From the branch manager. Now answer the question. Arya. My mother whispered, eyes darting to the window as if someone might be listening. We can't enough, I snapped. You took my money. You lied to me. And now federal flags are attached to my account. I deserve the truth. Dad sank into a chair. For the first time, he looked smaller than I remembered, like a man who had already lost. His name is Marshall Wynne, he said quietly. The name meant nothing to me. But the tone Dad used, fear laced with resignation, told me everything. He works for a group, Dad went on, a private financial enforcement firm. Enforcement, I repeated. What does that even mean? It means, Mom whispered, they collect debts, not casinos, not shady bookmakers. A firm, a structured entity, organized. And Ethan owed them money, I pressed. Dad rubbed his face. It started as gambling, but then it wasn't about gambling anymore. He got involved with people who wanted information. Access. I don't understand. At his job, Dad said. They wanted client data. He refused at first, but he was already in too deep. They told him they'd wipe his debt if he cooperated. The air thinned. My lungs refused to work properly. You're telling me Ethan wasn't just gambling, I said slowly. He was feeding data to a criminal organization. Mom flinched at the word criminal, but neither parent corrected me. My mind spun. My brother, the same person who couldn't hold down a job, who missed birthdays, who treated responsibility like a contagious disease, had touched something capable of flagging federal attention. "And you paid them with my savings," I whispered. Dad's voice cracked. "They told us if we didn't pay, they would come after him. After us." Your mother was terrified. "You could have gone to the police," I snapped. "You could have warned me. But instead you forged my name and let them drag me into this." Mom's eyes filled with tears. "We thought they'd leave us alone after. We thought it would end." But it didn't. Dad dropped his gaze. "That was my confirmation. It never ends," he said, voice barely audible. "Not with them." I pushed back from the table. "I need to go." "Arya, please." Mom begged, reaching for my arm. "You're safer here with us." "No," I said, pulling away. "I'm safest wherever you are not making decisions for me." I grabbed my bag, marched outside, and slammed the door behind me. But I stopped halfway down the driveway when I saw Ethan leaning against my car. He was smoking, looking irritated, not scared, not remorseful, just inconvenienced. "You talked to them, didn't you?" he said. "Talked to who, Mom and Dad?" "Yes." "And now I know what you've dragged us into." He laughed short and sharp. "Dragged you into... saved you from..." My blood turned cold. "Saved me." "You don't get it," he said, stepping closer. "These people don't forgive mistakes. They don't forget. I did what I had to do. You stole my future, I fired back. There's nothing noble about that." He flicked ash onto the driveway. "You always think everything is about you. Maybe for once try understanding that real life doesn't care about your perfect plans." The cruel irony of that statement hit me like a slap. "And real life doesn't care about your excuses." Ethan sighed. "Look, things are in motion now. It's better if you stay out of it." "No," I said. "It's better if I understand exactly what you got us into." He paused, eyes narrowing. "Just be careful where you go digging. Not everyone appreciates curiosity." A chill went through me. Was that a threat? It was advice, he said, dropping his cigarette and crushing it beneath his heel. "Take it however you want." He walked back toward the house without another word. The porch light flickered above him, casting long shadows on the yard. Shadows that looked too much like bars. I climbed into my car with a shaking breath. My parents were terrified. The bank was warning me. My brother was acting like he had already chosen a side, and it wasn't ours. As I drove away, only one truth remained painfully clear. Whatever Ethan owed, whatever my parents paid, whatever the man in the black coat represented, this was far bigger than gambling. And if I didn't uncover the truth soon, the next thing this firm took wouldn't be money. It would be someone's life. I didn't go home that night. I drove aimlessly until the sky turned the dull blue of early morning and my phone buzzed with a message from Rachel asking if I was alive. I parked outside her apartment complex, rested my forehead on the steering wheel, and let myself breathe for the first time in hours. The exhaustion settled deep, but the fear never left. It clung to me like a second skin. Rachel opened her door before I even knocked. One look at me, and her expression softened from curiosity to concern. "Arya. Oh my God. Come in." I stepped inside and collapsed onto her couch. The warmth of her apartment felt unreal after the coldness of home. She handed me a mug of tea, sat across from me, and waited. Rachel never pushed. That was her gift. When I finally spoke, it all came rushing out: the drained college fund, the forged signatures, the unknown man, the shady group Ethan owed money to, the fear in my parents' eyes. I told her everything except the part where my brother practically threatened me. Saying that out loud felt like admitting something irreversible had happened to us. Rachel's face tightened as she listened. "Arya, this sounds like organized crime." "I know. And your parents just..." Agreed to pay them with your money. They thought it would keep Ethan alive. Rachel shook her head. That's not protection. That's desperation. I nodded. Grace at the bank told me my account was flagged with a code she'd never seen. Something federal. Rachel leaned forward. You need help. I don't know who to trust. She hesitated. Then, as if making a difficult decision, she stood and went to her bedroom. When she returned, she was holding a small business card, black, unmarked, except for an embossed silver name. Rowan Hale, Private Investigations. My eyebrows lifted. Where did you get this? He helped my cousin Emmy last year, Rachel said. She got caught in a financial mess her ex dragged her into. Not like this, but close enough. Is he legit? He's discreet. And expensive. But he actually cares about his clients. Emmy said he saved her. The word saved made something in me unclench. I'll call him. Rachel touched my arm. Arya, please don't do this alone. I nodded, though alone was exactly how I felt. Later that afternoon, I sat in my car outside a quiet office building on the north side of town, staring at the card again. Then I dialed. A man answered on the second ring. Hale. Mr. Hale. My name is Arya Carson. A friend gave me your number. I need help. A pause. Are you safe? The question startled me. I think so. If you have to think about it, the answer is no. Where are you? I told him. He considered for half a second. Stay in your car. Don't talk to anyone. I'll be there in 12 minutes. He hung up. I stared at my phone, stunned. No intake forms, no consultation fees, just action. It unnerved me almost as much as it comforted me. 12 minutes later, a dark SUV pulled into the lot. A man in his late 30s stepped out broad-shouldered, wearing a simple jacket, eyes scanning the area before he even approached my car. He tapped the roof lightly. Arya, I stepped out. Yes. Let's talk somewhere private. His voice was calm, grounded, the kind of voice trained to diffuse panic. We walked into the small lobby of the office building, and he motioned me into a conference room. Once the door closed, he sat across from me. Tell me everything from the beginning, he said. So I did. I repeated all the pieces I had given Rachel, filling in the details I had kept to myself. The forged signatures, the federal flags, the man beside my father during the withdrawal, Ethan's threats. Rowan sat still, absorbing every word without interruption. When I finished, he leaned back, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Your brother isn't dealing with loan sharks. I know. He's dealing with a group called the Calder Network. My breath caught. I had heard the word Calder once already. Grace mentioned a senior auditor named Calder. It couldn't be a coincidence. What do they do? I whispered. Rowan's jaw flexed. Money laundering, identity manipulation, covert asset movement. They keep a low physical profile but leave a fingerprint in financial systems. They're careful, most banks never notice their patterns. And Ethan got involved with them. He didn't get involved, Rowan corrected. He got used. And your parents paid because these people know exactly how to apply pressure. My stomach tightened. Grace said my account was flagged with something called HLX07F. She thought it was federal. Rowan's gaze sharpened. HLX is a Calder classification system. Your account wasn't flagged by the government. It was flagged by them. A chill ran down my spine. Why me? Because the money they took wasn't enough, he said. They don't just drain accounts. They study the people behind them. A horrifying implication dawned. They're coming after me. Rowan didn't flinch. They already have. My breath stilled. What do I do? For now, he said, standing, you listen to me. You don't go home. You don't contact your brother. And you don't check your accounts or emails from your own devices. Why? Because the moment you do, they'll know where you are. My heart hammered. He continued. You said your father wasn't alone at the bank. The man you described, tall, coat-controlled posture, that's Maura Calder's right hand. A woman runs them, I asked, surprised. Rowan nodded grimly. Maura Calder doesn't ask for loyalty. She demands it. I sank into my chair, the room tilting slightly. My simple life had turned into something unrecognizable in less than 48 hours. Rowan placed a secure phone on the table. From now on, you communicate only through this. I'll look into the Helix code attached to your account, and I'll find out how deep your family is in. My voice cracked. What if it's deeper than I think? He met my eyes. Then we dig deeper. I felt the full truth settle inside me with cold finality. This wasn't about a stolen college fund. This was about survival. And I had just chosen to fight. Rowan's safe house sat on the edge of town, tucked behind a line of old pines that looked like they'd been standing guard for decades. He drove us there without speaking, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror more often than the road itself. I didn't know if he was being cautious or paranoid. I also didn't know which one I preferred. When we stepped inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and cold metal. A pot of coffee sat half-brewed on a counter. A map of the region was pinned to a wall with small red markers scattered across it. It wasn't a home, it was a base. Sit, Rowan said gently. You need to hear this before anything else. I sat at a heavy wooden table. Rowan pulled out a thick folder, its edges worn from being handled too often. This is everything I have on Calder, he said. Some of it's verified, some of it's pattern recognition. All of it matters. He opened the folder. The first page held a photo of a woman in her mid-50s, sharp jawline, silver streak through her dark hair, eyes that looked like they could cut through steel. That's Maura Calder, Rowan said, CEO of Calder Asset Solutions. Publicly, it's a financial advising firm. Privately, it's a network that cleans money and replaces identities. I studied the photo, shivering at the calmness in her expression. It wasn't cruelty. It was certainty. Rowan continued. Your brother didn't meet her. He met one of her collectors. The man from the bank, I said. Yes. His name is Joel Wynn, former private security, fired for misconduct. Calder hired him 6 months later. He oversees debt recovery. The way Rowan said recovery made the hairs on my arms lift. And the account code, I asked. HLX07F. Rowan nodded. Helix classification. Calder uses it to tag accounts that are viable. Viable for what extraction, he said. If the account can be used again, flagged again, or leveraged. Once they attach Helix markers, they watch the account owner. They monitor patterns. They assess vulnerability. And they flagged me. They did more than flag you, Rowan replied. They copied your identity blueprint, the way you bank, your signatures, your authorization habits. My mouth went dry. Why to impersonate you, he said. To build a shell profile. Or to replace you entirely if they need a clean record. I gripped the edge of the table. You're saying they could erase me? Rowan softened. I'm saying they could overwrite you. That's different. But the result is similar. My pulse thundered in my ears. I forced myself to breathe slow and steady until the room stopped spinning. Your father, Rowan added, didn't understand what he was walking into. He thought he was paying off Ethan's debt. He didn't know he was giving Calder leverage. Leverage against me, I said. Rowan nodded. Your account is young, clean, untainted by bad transactions. That makes you more valuable than someone older with a long financial trail. So they used Ethan to get to me. They used Ethan to get to your father, Rowan corrected. Your father gave them you. I flinched at the truth. It wasn't malicious. It was worse. It was careless. Rowan pushed the folder aside. You need legal protection. Real legal protection. Not law enforcement, you're not ready for that. But someone who understands asset theft and identity corruption. I don't know any lawyers, I said. I do, Rowan replied. And one of them owes me a favor. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a business card printed on cream-colored stock. Marissa Quinn, financial crime attorney. Rowan continued. She used to prosecute white-collar cases. Now she specializes in protecting victims before the damage becomes irreversible. I hesitated. Will she believe me? Marissa believes evidence, Rowan said. And we'll have it. But first you need to make decisions your parents haven't. What decisions? Where you stand, who you trust, and how far you're willing to go. I swallowed. To do what? To get your life back, he said simply. Silence stretched between us. Outside wind rattled the pines. Somewhere deep inside me, a truth settled like heavy stone. If I didn't act now, Calder would dictate the rest of my life before I even turned 23. Rowan leaned forward. Tell me everything you didn't tell your parents. So I did. I told him about the night Ethan confronted me in the driveway, the way he warned me not to dig. I told him about the fear in my mother's voice, the helplessness in my father's posture. I told him how every part of my life, my education, my money, my name now felt like a loan someone intended to call in. Rowan listened without judgment. When I finished, he rubbed his thumb over his jaw. Ethan is either being coerced, he said, or he's deeper in than your parents know. Which is worse? I asked. They're the same, he replied. I stared out the window. The safe house looked peaceful, almost serene, but my chest pulsed with dread. Somewhere out there, Ethan was making choices that affected all of us. And the Calders were watching. Rowan stood. We're leaving at dawn. I'm taking you to meet Marissa. Why dawn? Because people who want to stay hidden move before the world wakes up. I nodded, even though fear was tightening my breath again. You'll stay here tonight, Rowan said. The doors are reinforced. Cameras cover the perimeter. If anyone comes within 100 yards, I'll know. His reassurance should have calmed me. Instead, it reminded me exactly how real this danger was. As I settled onto the couch, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly like pine and cold rain, Rowan paused at the doorway. Arya, he said quietly, you're not here because you're a victim. I lifted my gaze. You're here because you're a threat to someone powerful, and people like Maura Calder don't threaten beginners. The words echoed long after he left the room. A threat. Me. The thought was terrifying, and for the first time since this nightmare began, it gave me strength. Dawn came quietly, a pale ribbon of light threading through the blinds of the safe house. I hadn't slept much, but exhaustion had sharpened into something steadier, resolve mixed with dread. Rowan handed me a coffee as we walked to the SUV, the air still cold enough to sting my throat. Marissa's office is 2 hours away, he said, opening the passenger door. Once she hears your story, she'll know what steps to take next. What if she says there's nothing we can do? I asked. Rowan didn't hesitate. Then she's wrong. And we find someone else. We drove in silence for a while, passing farm fields still dusted with morning frost. I watched the landscape blur by thinking about my parents in our too-bright kitchen, thinking about Ethan's warning, thinking about the man beside my father in that bank photo. A normal family doesn't fall into something like this, not overnight. It meant we had all been blind for far too long. When we finally pulled into a quiet, tree-lined street, I felt the same nerves I'd felt before college interviews, except this time the stakes were life, not acceptance. Marissa Quinn's office occupied the second floor of a small brick building, its windows trimmed with dark blue paint. Rowan buzzed us in and led the way up the stairs. A woman in her 40s opened the door before we reached it. She wasn't what I expected. No sharp suit, no aggressive confidence. Instead, she wore a charcoal sweater, dark jeans, and a look that said she'd heard stories like mine far too often. You must be Arya, she said, extending her hand. Come in. Her office was warm, lined with law books and framed newspaper clippings, headlines about fraud cases, whistleblowers, class action victories. She motioned for us to sit. "Rowan gave me an overview last night," Marissa began, "but I need you to walk me through it in your own words. Take your time." So I did. I started from the acceptance letter, the confrontation with my parents, the visit to the bank, the security photo, Ethan's behavior, the Helix code on my account. When I finished, Marissa was quiet, studying me with an expression I couldn't read. Finally, she leaned back. "You're in danger, Arya. Real danger." I swallowed hard. Hearing it spoken aloud made it heavier, more undeniable. "Your parents made a decision out of fear," she continued. "They thought they were protecting their son, but what they actually did was hand over leverage to a group that understands how to weaponize vulnerability." "And the Helix code?" I asked. Marissa's eyes darkened. "Helix-coded accounts aren't just monitored, they're prepped." "For what?" "For ownership transfer," she said, "or identity replacement. Calder uses a pattern drain the account copy, the identity then set up a mirrored profile to use in offshore transactions. Your name becomes their shield." A cold wave crawled across my skin. "How do I stop them?" "That's the good news," she said. "You already have. The moment you confronted the bank and started asking questions, your profile stopped being usable. Calder doesn't like attention." "And the bad news?" I asked. Marissa exchanged a look with Rowan. "They may try to intimidate you into silence," Rowan said, "or scare you into going home. They prefer control." Marissa nodded. "But you're not their usual target. You're educated, persistent, and now connected to both a PI and a financial crime attorney. You're not alone." Her words steadied me more than I expected. However, she added, "I need to ask you something difficult. Has your family contacted you since you left?" "No," I said, then hesitated. "My mother texted once asking if I was safe." Marissa's expression tightened. "And your brother?" I shook my head. "Nothing." "That silence matters," she said. "Calder rarely threatens, only once. They press where it hurts family. If they haven't reached out again, it means they think your parents can still be leveraged." "Meaning," I whispered. "Meaning Calder may be using them to monitor you," she said softly. "Or preparing to." The room went unbearably still. "I need to see the flagged transaction logs," Marissa said, turning to Rowan, "and any digital copies of the Helix metadata." "I have everything," Rowan replied. Grace from the bank gave Arya screenshots. I pulled supplemental data from a secure source. Marissa accepted the folder, scanning quickly. This is more organized than I expected. Whoever did this knew they were working within a protected structure." She closed the folder gently, as though it were a wound that might reopen. Then she looked at me. "Arya, you need to understand something. This isn't about Ethan anymore. It hasn't been for a long time." "I know," I whispered. "And your parents aren't withholding the truth to protect Ethan anymore either." I frowned. "Then who?" "Each other," Marissa said. "Because they both made decisions they're ashamed of. Decisions they think you won't forgive." A lump formed in my throat. I wouldn't have turned my back on them. "Fear doesn't speak the language of logic," she replied. "They believe if you knew everything, you'd never come home again." I stared down at my hands. Maybe they're right. Marissa offered a gentle, weary smile. "Maybe. But survival comes first. Forgiveness comes later." Rowan leaned forward. "There's one more piece we haven't addressed." Marissa nodded. "Arya Calder won't walk away from this quietly. They've already invested time and resources into your profile. They won't like losing it." My chest tightened. "What do we do next?" Marissa folded her hands. "We cut the ties they're using to find you. That means no more logging into personal accounts. No contact with your parents until we know they're safe. and absolutely no going home. And Ethan? I asked. Rowan's expression darkened. We find him before they do. A sudden sharp knock on the office door froze all three of us. Rowan's hand went to his jacket instinctively. Marissa rose silent as a breath peering through the peephole. She turned back to us, eyes cold with warning. "It's your father." My father stood in the hallway looking thinner, older, as if the last 2 days had aged him 10 years. His coat hung loosely over his frame and his eyes darted down the corridor before settling on me. When Marissa opened the door, he exhaled in relief. "Arya, thank God," he said, stepping forward. Rowan blocked him with one arm. "Stop right there." Dad froze, startled. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need to talk to my daughter." Marissa folded her arms. "How did you find this office?" Dad looked at me, guilt pooling in his face. "Your mother found a business card in your room. We went through your things when you left." "I'm sorry, we were worried." I stiffened. So they'd searched my room. For what? Some hint of where I'd run or something? Calder told them to look for Rowan, didn't step aside. "Who else knows you're here?" "No one," Dad insisted. "Your mother doesn't even know I left the house." That doesn't answer the question Rowan pressed. Dad's voice cracked. "I swear no one followed me." Rowan studied him for a long moment, then finally stepped back. 3 minutes. Then you leave." Dad nodded, eyes flicking to Marissa. He didn't seem to know what to make of her presence. But when he finally looked at me again, he wilted. "Arya," he whispered, "you can't disappear like this." "I didn't disappear," I said coldly. "I escaped." He flinched as if I'd struck him. "We never meant to hurt you." I opened my mouth, but Marissa spoke first. "Mr. Carson, this is not the place for vague apologies. Your daughter is at risk. You need to be specific." Dad swallowed, then sank into a chair across from me. "I need you to know," he began slowly, "that what your mother and I did, draining your account, we thought we were protecting our family. You weren't protecting anyone," I said. "You were feeding a monster." He closed his eyes, shame flickering across his face. "We didn't understand who we were dealing with, not at first." Rowan leaned against the wall. "When did you understand?" Dad's hands twisted together. "When they came to the house." My breath caught. "Who Joel Wynn and a woman," he said. "She never gave her name, but I think she was the one in charge. She asked for you." Every muscle in my body tightened. "Why?" "She said Dad whispered that your account had been activated. She wanted verification that the signature samples were accurate. She said any discrepancy could cause complications." My stomach churned. "Signature samples?" "She had a folder with your documents, old leases, school forms, job applications, things I don't know how she obtained. She asked me to confirm your handwriting." My voice dropped into a whisper. "Did you?" "Yes," he said, breaking. "I did." I stared at him in disbelief. "You helped them build the fake version of me." He didn't deny it. "I didn't know how far they could go," he said. "They threatened Ethan. They implied they could find you anywhere." He shook his head. "Your mother begged me to cooperate, and you listened," I said. He looked at me helplessly. "What else could we do?" Marissa cut in sharply. "Tell the truth to the police. Seek protection. Not deliver your daughter's identity on a platter." Dad's shoulders sagged. We were terrified. They told us if we involved law enforcement, they'd come for Ethan first. And they made it clear they knew where you were, where you work your schedule, everything. Rowan stepped forward. "Did you bring anything with you?" "Papers, messages." Dad pulled a folded slip of paper from his coat pocket. "I found this shoved under our front door this morning." He handed it to Rowan, who scanned it quickly. His jaw tightened. "What does it say?" I asked. Rowan passed it to Marissa. She read it aloud. Status update HLX07F is ready for finalization, awaiting verification of asset mobility and behavioral compliance. She exhaled sharply. They're moving forward. They wanted to see whether you'd accept the loss or fight. And because I fought, I whispered. They accelerated. Rowan finished. Dad looked at me, then truly looked at me, fear etched into every line on his face. Arya, please come home. We can handle this together. No, Marissa said firmly. Home is the last place she should go. Dad turned to her. But they'll come for us again if she doesn't. They'll come regardless, Rowan said. You've already been compromised. Dad's eyes filled with tears. Then what do we do? Marissa's voice was steady. You stop lying. You tell us everything. Right now. Dad hesitated. Then something inside him broke open. We owed more than money, he said. Ethan gave them access to his company's client lists. When the company discovered the breach, they traced irregular login activity back to our home router. My heart dropped. To our house, Dad nodded. They knew someone inside our family had been playing both sides. So Calder told us that unless we delivered everything they asked, your signatures, your banking patterns, your schedule, they'd leak evidence tying us to Ethan's breach. So they blackmailed you? I said numbly. They gave us 48 hours to comply, he whispered. And we did. Because we didn't know what else to do. Silence crashed around us. Then Rowan said, One more question. Has Calder made physical contact with the house since the first visit? Dad hesitated. Yes. When last night? My blood ran cold. What did they say? Marissa asked quickly. They said Dad whispered that the next time they needed to find Arya, they wouldn't knock. A tremor went through me. Rowan's jaw tightened. We're done, he said. Arya, get your coat. We're leaving. Where? I asked. He didn't hesitate. Someplace Calder has never been. Dad rose as if to follow, but Rowan held up a hand. Stay put. Lock the door behind us. And do not leave this building. Calder is watching you, not her. Dad's voice cracked. Arya, I'm sorry. I didn't answer. I couldn't. As Rowan led me down the hallway, my father called after me again, soft, desperate braking. But I kept walking. Because now I understood something terrible. Calder didn't just want my money. They wanted my identity. And if they couldn't get it willingly, they'd take it by force. Rowan drove with one hand on the wheel and the other gripping a burner phone, his jaw tight enough to fracture. The farther we got from the city, the more the landscape shifted. Less traffic, fewer houses, wider fields covered in pale winter grass. I kept expecting him to turn onto a familiar road, but he didn't. He just kept going. Where are we going? I finally asked. A cabin, he said. One I've used before, off-grid. No cell towers, no digital signatures, no prying eyes. How long will we stay there? As long as it takes. His voice left no room for argument. Still, fear crawled up my spine. Leaving civilization felt like surrendering the illusion of safety I'd been clinging to. But what about my parents? I asked quietly. Rowan exhaled. Right now they're bait. Calder will watch them because they believe you'll go back. And what if Calder retaliates? We'll get them help, he said. But we need to secure you first. I looked out the window as the road narrowed into gravel. Trees swallowed the sky thick and dark like a wall. Rowan turned onto a dirt path marked only by a faded mailbox. The world grew silent except for the crunch of tires on frost. The cabin appeared between two pines, a simple wooden structure, isolated but sturdy. Rowan parked the SUV and cut the engine. This is where you'll be safest, he said. I stared at the cabin, at the loneliness of it, and felt the full weight of my situation. 2 days ago, my biggest concern was preparing for college. Now I was hiding from a criminal network that wanted my identity. Rowan opened the trunk and handed me the evidence folder and the Helix screenshots. Inside. Don't let these out of your sight. I followed him up the creaking steps. The door opened with a soft groan, revealing a surprisingly clean interior, wood floors, simple furniture, a stone fireplace, and a small kitchen area. It felt less like a hideout, and more like a place someone had once loved. Rowan locked the door behind us, then walked to the kitchen table and spread out his equipment: radio blockers, encrypted devices, a small laptop with no serial markings. "Sit," he said. "We need to talk before the sun sets." I sat across from him, hands wrapped around my arms. "Aria Rowan began everything that's happened so far points to one thing: Calder has moved your profile into the activation phase." I swallowed. What does that mean? It means they're preparing to use you. For what? Rowan rubbed his temple. "You're young. You have clean credit. Your records are stable. Your education makes you look trustworthy. Calder wants to use your identity as a pass-through for offshore funds. So I'd take the blame if the transfers were traced." Exactly. The room felt too small, the air too thin. Rowan leaned forward. "When your father validated your handwriting, they built a credible digital version of you. They could open accounts in your name, sign documents, authenticate loans, and they were waiting to see whether you'd resist." "And because I did." "They escalated," he said. "They always do when someone doesn't fold." A knock at the door made my heart stop. Rowan's hand dropped instantly to his holster. "Stay behind me." The knock came again, 3 sharp raps. A pause, then one more. Rowan looked through the peephole, then relaxed slightly. "It's Grace." I blinked. "Grace Holloway." From the bank. Rowan opened the door. Grace stepped inside, quickly pulling her coat tight. Her face was pale, her eyes frantic. "I had to come," she said. "I didn't know where else to go." "What happened?" I asked. Grace's hands shook as she set down a small flash drive. I accessed the internal logs again and... Aria, someone wiped the Helix record. Rowan's expression sharpened. "When?" "This morning. But not cleanly. Whoever did it didn't know I had created a shadow file the night you came in." She pointed to the drive. "This is everything. The signatures they forged, the routing numbers, the copied ID template." I felt both nauseous and relieved. "You saved it." Grace nodded. "Because I knew something was wrong, but now they know I accessed it. Someone from corporate called me 30 minutes ago. They asked if I'd spoken to any external investigators." A spike of panic hit me. "Do they know you're here?" "I don't think so," Grace said. "But Aria, before I left the bank, a man came in asking about you." My stomach twisted. "What man?" She hesitated. "The same one from the photo." "Joel Wynn." Rowan cursed under his breath. "They're closing in faster than I thought." Grace turned to him. "He said corporate flagged Aria's account again and that he needed updated authorization records." He kept looking at my computer screen. "He's checking every angle," Rowan said, "trying to confirm whether Aria is compliant or resisting." Grace lowered her voice. "I didn't give him anything, but when I walked to my car, someone had opened my trunk." Fear punched me like cold water. Rowan stood. "Grace, you can't go home." "I know," she whispered. "That's why I came here." I barely had time to process that before Rowan's burner phone buzzed on the table. He checked it, and his expression darkened further. "What is it?" I asked. He handed me the phone. The text displayed was from an unknown number. Final notice. HLX-07F must be secured by midnight. Compliance is expected. My hands trembled. Grace whispered, "They're talking about you." I felt the floor tilt underneath me. Midnight. A deadline. Rowan grabbed his jacket. "We need to move. Now." "Where?" I asked. "To find the person who created the Helix system," Rowan said. "The only one who can break it." Grace frowned. "Who is that?" Rowan met my eyes. "Amelia Trent," he said. Former federal auditor. She vanished 3 years ago. My heart hammered. Vanished? How? By choice, Rowan said. But she's the only person Calder fears. The cabin suddenly felt less like shelter and more like a ticking clock. Because if Calder wanted me secured by midnight, I didn't want to imagine what secured meant. We left the cabin before the frost on the grass had time to melt Rowan driving with the precision of someone who expected danger at every bend. Grace sat in the back seat clutching the flash drive like it was the last piece of her life that hadn't been taken from her. I kept glancing at the clock on the dashboard. Every passing minute felt like a countdown. Where are we meeting Amelia? I asked. Her last confirmed location was in a small town outside Duluth, Rowan said. If she hasn't moved again. Grace looked up sharply. If she has moved what then? Then we keep looking, Rowan replied. She's the last expert who understands Helix. We need her. The road stretched endlessly ahead, the sky gray and low, the landscape barren except for the occasional cluster of pines. I tried not to think about midnight. I tried not to imagine Calder marking the hours until they came for me. Aria Grace said softly, "You need to understand something. When they set a deadline, they don't miss it." I know. I'm serious. People don't walk away from the activation phase. They vanish financially or otherwise. I closed my eyes, steadying myself. That's why we're doing this. Grace fell silent. After nearly an hour, Rowan pulled off the highway and onto a dirt road leading to a clearing with an old ranger station. He stepped out and motioned for us to follow. "She's supposed to make contact here," he said. How I asked, shivering in the cold. "There's no one around." "She doesn't meet people directly," Rowan explained. "She sends a sign." Before I could ask what kind of sign, a distant buzz filled the air, then grew louder. A drone emerged over the treetops, hovering above us like a mechanical hawk. A small metal cylinder detached from its frame, landing at Rowan's feet with a soft crunch in the snow. He crouched, opened the cylinder, and pulled out a note. "What does it say?" Grace whispered. Rowan read it, then handed it to me. "Use vehicle. Follow trail markers. No electronics beyond point 2. Come alone." "Alone," I repeated, staring at Rowan. "She wants me alone." "She doesn't trust anyone else," he said, "especially anyone with ties to Calder, even indirectly." Grace spoke quickly. "Rowan, you can't send her alone." "I'm not sending her," Rowan said. "Amelia is." My pulse hammered. "What if it's a trap?" "It isn't," he said. "Amelia doesn't work with Calder. She disappears because Calder wants her gone, and because she knows too much." The drone rose again, disappearing behind the trees. Rowan placed a hand on my shoulder. "You'll have to drive the SUV. Grace and I will stay here with the blockers. Follow the orange trail markers. Amelia will be at the end." "Why me?" I asked. "Because you triggered the Helix protocol," Rowan said. "Amelia will only talk to the asset being targeted." Asset. The word made me shiver, but I nodded. Grace gave me the flash drive. "Don't lose this. It's the only intact copy." I slipped it into my jacket. Rowan opened the back of the SUV and handed me a compact radio. "This isn't connected to anything. If you get in trouble, press the side button twice." "What if someone else finds me before Amelia?" I asked. Rowan hesitated, a rare crack in his composure. "Then run. And don't stop." I swallowed hard, started the engine, and turned onto a narrow trail painted with faint orange reflectors nailed to trees every 50 yards. The deeper I went, the more isolated the world felt. The trees grew taller, the air sharper, the silence heavier. After several minutes, the trail widened into a clearing. A weathered cabin sat in the center, smoke curling from its chimney. No vehicles, no people. Just stillness. I parked and stepped out, boots crunching on frozen ground. "Hello," I called. A voice answered from the shadows. "Close the door behind you. Quickly." I spun toward the cabin. A woman stood in the doorway, partially hidden. Her hair was silver cut short. Her eyes held the calculation of someone who trusted no one. "Are you Amelia Trent?" I asked. She nodded once. "Come in." Inside the cabin was lined with maps, old file boxes, and a laptop connected to what looked like a battery-powered server. Everything hummed quietly. Amelia locked the door. "Give me the drive." I handed it over, watching her every movement. She inserted it into the laptop, her fingers flying across the keys. After a minute, she said, "This is worse than I expected." "What is Helix?" I asked. "What does it actually do?" Amelia's eyes flicked to me. "It's a system for identity folding. I don't know what that means. It means they bend your identity around another profile," she said. "Your name becomes a shell. Your financial behavior gets copied and blended. They can operate as you without triggering alerts." "Can they erase me?" I asked. "No," she said. "But they can bury you." A cold pulse shivered through me. Amelia pulled up a screen showing a branching diagram, lines, nodes, my name appearing in multiple places. "They've duplicated your profile 8 times," she said, each one linked to a different offshore holding. My knees weakened. "So they're already using me?" "No," she corrected. "They're preparing to. They're waiting for one last requirement." "What requirement?" Her eyes met mine. "Physical compliance." "What does that mean?" "It means they want you somewhere they can take confirmation signatures and biometric scans. They need your physical presence before activation." "And the midnight deadline," Amelia's expression hardened. "Midnight is when they'll try to retrieve you, by force if necessary." Fear surged up my spine. "Can we stop it?" I whispered. "Yes," Amelia said, "but you won't like how." "How?" I asked, voice shaking. "You're going to expose them." I blinked. "How they're everywhere." "And yet they crumble under proof," she said. "The flash drive you brought, it's enough to begin." I exhaled, a flicker of hope sparking until Amelia added softly, "But first, you need to hear something." She handed me a second file. Inside was a name, my brother's, followed by a line of text that turned my blood to ice. Primary contributing source, Ethan Carson. I stared up at Amelia. "What does this mean?" She didn't soften it. "Your brother didn't fall into Calder's hands by accident," she said. "He brought them to your family." The world tilted, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt truly, terrifyingly alone. The file in my hands felt heavier than its weight, as if every line inside it pressed down against my ribs. I read Ethan's name again, the stark text beneath it blurring, sharpening, blurring again. A part of me insisted there had to be a mistake. Ethan was reckless, selfish, impulsive. But this? Bringing Calder to our doorstep? Voluntarily. It didn't fit the brother I once knew. Or maybe that was the point. Maybe I never knew him at all. "How long?" I whispered. Amelia crossed her arms, her voice calm but merciless. 3 years since the first data breach he facilitated. Your parents believed the gambling lies. Calder used those lies to mask a far more profitable cooperation. He was selling them information, I said numbly. He was giving them access, she corrected. Passwords, protocols, systems. He wasn't skilled enough to exploit the data himself, but he could open the doors. The betrayal struck deep, carving out something hollow inside me. "I need air," I muttered, stumbling toward the door. Amelia didn't stop me. Outside, cold wind slapped my face, crisp and sharp enough to ground me. I inhaled until my lungs burned. My breath shook out in uneven bursts. A twig snapped behind me. I startled until Rowan appeared from the tree line, panting lightly as if he'd been running. "You're alive," I breathed. He managed a faint smile. "Barely. Amelia doesn't make it easy to find her. And the drone didn't exactly come with GPS instructions. You all right?" I shook my head. "Not really." Ethan, I couldn't say the rest. Rowan's expression hardened as I held up the file. He brought Calder to us, I said, my voice breaking. This whole thing started because he gave them access years ago. Rowan exhaled long and slow. I suspected something like that. You suspected, I echoed. And you didn't tell me I needed facts before I crushed your world, he said softly. I'm sorry. I sank down onto a fallen log, the cold seeping through my jeans. My parents thought they were saving him, but he started all of it. People like Ethan don't see consequences, Rowan said. Only escape routes. A flash of anger flickered beneath my grief. A cold, sharp clarity rose with it. He used us, I said. All of us. And Calder used him, Rowan added. He was convenient, not essential. That distinction hurt almost as much as the betrayal. We went back inside where Amelia was still working lines of code and diagrams filling her screen. Grace stood near the window, arms hugged around herself, listening to every word with the anxiety of someone who had just realized she was deeper in the dark than she knew. Amelia turned her laptop toward us. I found something, she said. Your Helix profile wasn't maintained only by Calder. Someone inside the bank accessed it repeatedly. Someone who wasn't following protocol. Grace paled. A corporate auditor? No, Amelia said. Someone junior. Someone instructed to watch the account but not modify it. Who, I asked. Amelia clicked another window open. A name appeared. My mother. My breath caught. No, that can't be right. My mother doesn't know anything about finance. She knows love, Amelia said gently. And fear. Calder thrives on both. Grace whispered. They used her login credentials. They must have pressured her. She wouldn't know how to protect herself. Rowan's jaw tightened. So Calder forced the mother to monitor the daughter. I felt a sickening wave of disbelief. Why would she do it? Because she thought compliance would shield you, Amelia said. Instead, it made you visible. I closed my eyes. Everything I'd feared, everything I hated, folded into a single truth: my family hadn't just made mistakes. They had been dismantled piece by piece. The realization left me hollow. Rowan stepped closer. We need to move before midnight. Amelia, do you have what we need? Yes, she said. I've compiled the entire Helix thread, enough to implicate the network and fracture their structure, but it has to reach someone with jurisdiction. Someone federal, Grace said. Amelia nodded. A contact in the Office of Financial Crimes. She retired years ago but still has influence. If she vouches for this, the system will take it seriously. Where is she? Rowan asked. Downtown Duluth, Amelia replied. A public place, lots of cameras. Calder won't risk an extraction there. I stared at Amelia. So that's the plan? We deliver the evidence and Calder collapses. That's naive, she said gently. Calder won't collapse today, or tomorrow, but they'll bleed, and bleeding networks make mistakes. That's when federal agencies strike. Rowan checked his watch. We have 6 hours to get there. We'll make it, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. Before we left, Amelia handed me a plain envelope. Don't open this until you have no other choice. What is it? A contingency plan, she said, if things go wrong. My stomach tightened, but I nodded and tucked the envelope into my jacket. We hurried outside, but Rowan stopped so abruptly that I collided with his back. What I started, but then I saw it. A black SUV was parked at the edge of the clearing. No headlights, no engine noise, just waiting. Grace gasped. Amelia swore under her breath. Rowan grabbed my arm. Get behind me. The SUV's driver's door opened. A figure stepped out. Tall, dark coat. The same controlled posture from the bank photo. Joel Wynn. My pulse crashed in my ears. Rowan whispered, "This is it. Stay calm." Joel took one step toward us, snow crunching beneath his boots. Then another. His eyes locked on me the way a hawk locks on a rabbit. "Arya Carson," he said, voice smooth as ice. "You missed your appointment." Rowan shifted, ready to shield me. But Joel lifted a hand. "No need for theatrics," he said. "I'm only here to deliver a message." He paused, letting the silence bite. "Midnight," he said softly. "Don't make us come get you." Then he turned and walked back to the SUV. The engine roared to life. The vehicle vanished down the trail. The silence that followed was suffocating. Rowan finally spoke. "We go now." And for the first time I understood the stakes not as fear, but as a promise. If Calder wanted a fight, they'd just found one. The forest closed in around us as we ran, branches snapping beneath our boots, breath turning to white vapor in the freezing air. Rowan's hand clamped around mine, pulling me forward every time my footing slipped on the icy ground. Behind us, voices cut through the storm, low, sharp commands. Calder's people were spreading out, closing the perimeter. "Don't stop!" Rowan hissed. "They're fanning out to corner us." My lungs burned, and the cold clawed into my chest with each ragged breath. Snow fell harder, turning the world into a blur of white and shadows. Grace had stayed behind in the cabin as a decoy, promising she'd stall anyone who tried to breach the door. The guilt of leaving her gnawed at me with every step. "What if they take her?" I gasped. "She knew the risk," Rowan said. "Right now she's safer than we are." Branches scraped my arms as we tore through the underbrush. The duffel bag with Amelia's files slammed against my side, with each stride the evidence that could dismantle Calder's network if it reached Amelia's contact in Duluth. A shout echoed to our left, another to our right. "They're surrounding us," I cried. "Then we break the circle." He veered sharply downhill, and I followed, stumbling through drifts that reached my knees. The slope grew steeper until we were half sliding, half running. When we reached the bottom, Rowan pressed his back against a tree, listening. I leaned into the bark beside him, my pulse hammering so loudly that I feared it would give us away. Snow muted everything except the crunch of distant boots. "They're tracking us by direction," Rowan murmured. "Not by visuals. The storm's helping." "So what do we do?" I whispered. "We change direction." He grabbed a handful of snow and rubbed it over our jackets, blending us into the white landscape. Then he nodded to the right. "This way. Quiet now." We moved slower, weaving between trees. The wind howled through the branches like a warning. My legs shook, part exhaustion, part fear, but I kept going. The folder inside the duffel bag felt almost alive with importance. I couldn't let Calder silence it. Or me. Rowan raised a fist, suddenly signaling me to stop. I froze. Ahead through the trees, beams of light cut through the snowfall flashlights, sweeping in wide arcs. 3 silhouettes trudged across the ridge. "Joel," I whispered. "No," Rowan said. "Scouts." Wynn wouldn't be this sloppy. One flashlight angled downward. Another turned sharply our direction. Rowan tugged me behind a fallen log and crouched low, covering me with his body as the beam passed inches above us. I held my breath until the lights drifted away. "We move now," Rowan whispered. "They'll circle back." We crept forward deeper into the woods. The snowfall thickened again, swallowing footprints quickly. But then Rowan's radio cracked. 1 click, 2 clicks, a third. Rowan's face blanched. "They're signaling each other. They found something." My blood iced over. "We have to run," he said. "Now." We sprinted, no longer caring about noise. Branches whipped my hair, snow blinded my eyes, the storm drowning out everything but the pounding of our footsteps. Behind us, voices rose again, angrier this time. "They're close," I cried. Rowan didn't answer. He just grabbed my arm tighter and yanked me through a thicket of trees until we burst into a small clearing. A frozen stream stretched before us, shimmering faintly beneath the swirling snow. "We cross," Rowan said. He stepped onto the ice first, testing each footfall before motioning for me. I followed carefully, the ice groaning under our weight. A sickening crack echoed behind me. I gasped and lunged forward as Rowan pulled me to the opposite side. We reached solid ground just as voices hit the tree line. There, tracks cut them off. We ducked behind an outcropping of stone. Rowan pulled me close, murmuring against my ear, "You're doing fine. Just a little further." His breath warmed my cheek. My heart steadied for just a moment. Then a flare of red light illuminated the stream. Someone had fired a signal flare. Rowan swore. "They're marking our position." We pushed forward again, climbing a narrow path that twisted uphill. My muscles screamed, but adrenaline carried me upward. When we reached the ridge, the wind hit us so hard that I staggered back. Rows of pines bent under the force. Snow blasted sideways, erasing the trail instantly. Rowan scanned the area. "There's a ranger outpost half a mile north. If we reach it, we can send a distress ping to Amelia. But half a mile in this storm? We don't have a choice." We started toward the outpost. Then I heard it. A crack, a thud, a grunt of pain. I turned to see Rowan drop to his knees, his hand clutching his side. Snow around him darkened. "Rowan!" I screamed, rushing to him. He drew a shallow breath. "Bullet grazed me." Footsteps thundered behind us. Calder's men were close. "Get up," I begged. "We can't stop." He forced himself up with a groan. "Take the bag." "No, Arya, take it now." His voice tore through the wind. I grabbed the duffel, slinging it over my shoulder just as two figures emerged from the tree line. Flashlights cut through the whiteout. One beam landed on us. "There they are. Run," Rowan yelled. We bolted toward the ranger station, the storm battering us from every side. Rowan stumbled but kept going. I shouted encouragement I wasn't sure either of us believed. The outpost came into view, a small dark shape against the snow. But so did another shape. A man stepped out from behind the building. Tall, dark coat, controlled posture. Joel Wynn, blocking the door. Rowan skidded to a stop. I collided with his back, breath stolen from me. Joel smiled. Midnight came early. His hand moved to his coat. Rowan shoved me aside. "Arya, go!" But I didn't move. I couldn't. Because Joel had already drawn the gun and pointed it at Rowan. The barrel of Joel Wynn's gun glinted through the storm, a thin streak of black against the white-out sky. Time didn't slow. It simply fractured each second, splintering into panic and instinct. Rowan staggered but held his ground, blood seeping through his jacket, breath ragged. "Step away from him," Joel commanded. His voice cut through the wind with the precision of a blade. "You know why I'm here, Arya. You were supposed to come quietly." I felt the duffel strap biting into my shoulder, the weight of the evidence heavy against my side. 1,000 thoughts rushed through me, my future, my parents, Ethan's betrayal, but one rose higher than all the others. I wasn't going to disappear tonight. "I'm not going anywhere with you," I said, my voice trembling but steady. Joel cocked his head, amused. "You think you have a choice? You were marked the moment your father signed those authorizations. You're a finished asset now." Rowan groaned, trying to rise. Joel flicked the gun toward him. "One more inch and I'll drop you where you stand." "No." I stepped in front of Rowan instinctively. Joel's smile widened. "There she is, the compliant one. Good. Now hand me the bag." He reached out. I tightened my grip. "This is evidence." "This," he corrected gently, "is leverage." Before I could respond, a voice called out from the left. "Put the gun down, Wynn!" Joel stiffened. Amelia Trent stepped out from behind the trees, her hair whipped by the wind, a flare gun steady in her hands. 2 red laser points danced across Joel's chest. Snipers hidden somewhere in the storm. Joel hissed, "You brought backup." "I brought witnesses," Amelia replied. "Smile for the Federal Archives." Joel's finger twitched on the trigger. Rowan lunged. A shot fired loud, sharp, exploding through the clearing. For a moment I didn't know who had been hit. The world turned into white and noise and fear. Then Rowan dropped to the ground again, and Joel jerked sideways as a red laser flashed one of Amelia's snipers had fired, striking Joel's shoulder. He stumbled, cursed, and disappeared into the swirling trees, slipping away like a shadow retreating from light. "Rowan!" I cried, dropping beside him. His eyes fluttered open. "Just a graze." Again he muttered, "They really need to work on their aim." Despite everything, I almost laughed. Amelia knelt beside us, her expression all business. "We need to move. My team will sweep the area, but Calder won't stop after tonight. We have to deliver the evidence before they regroup." She helped Rowan to his feet, and together we pushed onward toward the ranger outpost. Inside, warmth flooded the air, a stark contrast to the chaos outside. Amelia immediately activated a secure comms terminal, an encrypted line with more protections than the Pentagon. "This is Trent," she said. "Code Redwood 7. Transfer incoming." The system hummed as she inserted the drive. Screens flickered, lines of digital pathways unfurling like veins across illuminated maps. When the upload bar reached 100%, Amelia exhaled. "It's done. The evidence is in the federal system. Calder can't erase this now. They're exposed." Grace, who had arrived moments later with one of Amelia's scouts, covered her face with her hands. "So it's over." "Not yet," Amelia said, "but the tide just turned." As we waited for confirmation, Rowan sat beside me, wincing as he pressed a cloth to his wound. I leaned into him, exhaustion and relief finally hitting me at once. "You saved me," I whispered. He shook his head. "You saved yourself. I just kept up." A soft chime sounded from Amelia's terminal. A message flashed across the screen. "Federal review authorized. Calder Network flagged for immediate investigation. Asset HLX 07F cleared and protected." HLX 07F. I murmured. That was me. "Not anymore," Amelia said. "You're free." For the first time since this nightmare began, I believed her. Hours later, we were escorted to Duluth, where I gave my official statement. Grace did the same. Rowan received medical treatment. Amelia disappeared as quietly as she had arrived. By sunrise, Calder's offices were raided. Joel Wynn was apprehended crossing into Canada. And Maura Calder, the woman whose network had nearly rewritten my life, fled her estate only to be cornered by federal agents in a private hangar. She didn't go quietly, but she went. My parents were placed under federal protection while investigators untangled which parts of their involvement were forced and which were chosen. Ethan, well, he made his own choices, and he would face them without dragging me down anymore. As for me, I stood outside the federal building that next afternoon watching the sun rise over Lake Superior. It cast a golden shimmer across the water, and for the first time in months, I let myself imagine a future that belonged entirely to me. I was bruised, exhausted, and changed in ways I hadn't expected. But I was alive, and I wasn't afraid anymore. As I sat on a bench overlooking the lake, I pulled out my phone, the new one, the safe one, and opened the camera. I recorded a short message for myself, something to remember whenever fear tried to creep back in. "I'm still here," I said quietly, "and no one gets to erase me." Then I closed my phone and let the cold breeze wash over my face. If you've stayed with me through this journey, I want to ask you something. What would you have done in my place? Would you have fought back or walked away? I'd love to hear your thoughts below. If stories like this resonate with you, stories of resilience, justice, and ordinary people standing against the powerful, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need strength today. Your voice helps these stories reach others who feel unseen. Thank you for listening, and wherever you are, remember this. You are harder to erase than you think.